Hello, my name is Håkon and welcome back to my channel and another set of 3 videos today in my ongoing series where I first do a reading of one of my poems and then I make a video, which is this one, where I talk a bit about it. It might be the background, inspiration, imagery, poetic devices, things like that. And lastly, thirdly, there is going to be a song that uses the poem as lyrics. There is going to be one for this particular one as well, because I've prepared one earlier that I did a while back. So, today's poem is one called My Weeping Willow, and it is from this poetry collection, which is 3 words that I just published last week. And the title of this poetry collection was actually for a while intended to be Weeping Willow, but at some point I changed it to 3 words, and I just remembered why I did that. It wasn't that I didn't like the title Weeping Willow, or that I think 3 words is significantly better, but it actually had to do with the cover design and wanting a slightly bigger text. And Weeping Willow is a bit longer, and so that was the restricting factor for the size of the text. So if I made it a little bit shorter, the title, I would be able to use a slightly larger font, and I thought that looked better. So that's it. Sometimes it's as simple as that. It has nothing to do with any other consideration. The title of my book was actually decided partly by the size of the words. But once I decided to go with 3 words, it's one I quite like. It's a reference to a phrase used in 2 poems in the collection, and I like that it's a phrase that has a certain ambivalence and ambiguity to it. What are the 3 words? Is it I love you? Is it I hate you? Is it go and leave me alone? It could be all those things at the same time. I'll get back to that one day when I actually talk about one of the poems using that phrase. But for now, we are talking about My Weeping Willow. So, My Weeping Willow is one of the very few poems I've written that deliberately was written to be a kind of lullaby. And I think just the word weeping willow, it just in itself almost suggests a lullaby. It has that soothing, smooth, mellow, mellifluous quality to it that I think in itself is suggestive of lullabies. And also I think the tree itself is something that for me suggests the same kind of thing. It's something very relaxing about a weeping willow. So for those who might actually not be familiar with it, a weeping willow is a kind of tree that grows at the edge of the water. So it grows on land, it doesn't grow in the water, it grows on the edge of the water, of a lake or a river, or slow-moving river, and usually it's a lake. And it hangs above the water, and it's sort of its branches droop down like this. So it hangs down over the water, which is quite a unique look and quite an unusual tree. Growing up in Norway, it's not one I actually saw much of. I can't remember any weeping willows in where I grew up. So it's a tree that I would have known about and I would have seen it in pictures and movies, etc. But I probably didn't quite register so much until I was in England in 1994 on my study trip when I was studying English, and somebody pointed out to me that there was a weeping willow by the lake that we were walking along one night. And of course this also goes back a little bit to things I've said before about the year 1994 and the significance of it when it comes to my poetic journey. That is of course the year that I started writing poems that I thought were really good, and of course that was also when I was in England on my study trip. So all these things actually connect together. So that is a memory. The memory of the weeping willow by the lake was for me something that I had associations of walking next to someone I quite liked and talking, and the weeping willow being mentioned. So But this poem was not written back then, it was written several years later, and that's one of the things I was thinking of when I was writing it, was of course that sense of peace that I had at the time. There was something extremely peaceful about the night that we were walking along the lake, and the weeping willow was pointed out to me. So I came up with this concept of thinking that you grew up somewhere with a weeping willow over a lake? Wouldn't that become a nice place to play? Something that would feel very safe, very comfortable. You can be under a weeping willow and you can see through it, through the branches, but the outside world can't really see you so much. And you can be on the ground beneath it, you can be in the water beneath it, and there's just an image there that I really, really enjoyed. And the structure of this poem, which I don't know if you picked up on it yet, the first verse is about the past, it's about childhood, and looking back on a kind of nostalgic, innocent peacefulness of childhood, which of course is something I did deliberately. I wanted to use the weeping willow as the kind of metaphor for the innocence and also the sense of safety and security that you have when you are a child, provided of course that you have a good childhood, which most people do, but of course there are exceptions. But even if you have a troubled childhood, you still need to have your happy places. And I think most people, even the ones who suffer through some kind of abuse or bullying, other kinds of othering, even from the people that they love and that should love them back, they would have some kind of happy place, somewhere where they hide, somewhere where they feel safe. And so even if you don't have a happy childhood, your happy place might also be the weeping willow by the lake. That's where you feel safe, that's where you feel at home, that's where all those things come together. So I really like that image, and this is even before I considered the euphonic qualities of the phrase, the word weeping willow in itself. Another thing about the weeping willow that I quite like, actually, because it's right on the edge of the water. So in one way it's halfway on land and it's halfway in water. So it's like it's straddling two different worlds. And that's another thing that I thought connects really well with the idea of childhood as well, because you have the real world and you have the world of dreams, and in childhood is where those worlds, they meet and they merge, and sometimes the difference between them is a little bit fuzzy. It's very fuzzy, because that's what you do when you play. You imagine things being real. You know they're not real usually, but and that is something that also, as you grow older, something that you might lose as well. You might yearn for that feeling of not being sure sometimes what is a dream, what's reality. So it's like a straddling two different. It's like a magical thing then, and because it could be a dream, it could be a reality, it could be imagined, it could be, yeah. And then of course you have the being under a weeping willow. You feel safe from the world. Everything else is outside. So I really liked the image. I thought it was very evocative to me. And of course, when I write poetry, I don't write them for anyone else. I write them for myself usually, with a few exceptions, I would say, because I have written a few poems specifically to a specific person. But usually when I write something that sounds like it might be to a specific person, it is actually something that I've written for me, that isn't intended for that person to know or to see. At least it wasn't back in the day, but of course now that my poems are available for anyone to see, and that's still no longer the case. They might see it and they might understand or might not understand that I wrote it thinking about them, but that's another story. So Weeping Willow by the Lake, childhood first, and then the next three verses are about the present time in the poem, and it's also chronological in a way, because now you have day, you have evening, and then you have night time. So you can imagine that somebody who grew up in a place with a weeping willow. That was his happy place. That's where he felt safe. Maybe he was sheltering from something else, but maybe it was just a happy place, just something that was fun, and he played with someone else. And then he grows up, life goes on, he moves somewhere else, and then one day he comes back and he sees the weeping willow and he remembers what it was like being a child. So this song, well, I've almost called it a song now. This poem is about nostalgia as well, that yearning for the innocence and carefree happiness of childhood. And often when you get older, you often lose that connection with that calmness. There are so many things to worry about, so many things to be stressed about, so many things that can go wrong when you get older and you get more responsibilities. But in one way, you often stay more of a child than people think as well. So you need that comfort. That mother's comfort almost. So you can sort of think of the weeping willow in a way also as a kind of metaphor for a mother embracing their child as well. Also a deliberate thing in this one. And that really is what it's about, I guess, in a nutshell, what this poem is about. And of course, once I started writing this, I realized that there are lots of words that sound really good together with weeping willows. So I started sort of thinking, shallow, mellow, follow, swallow, billow, pillow, mellow, all those things. Even some that don't really go with the theme of the poem, like sallow and tallow and things like that. But there are lots of words that have a similar kind of sound, and many of them I thought would work really well in describing what I was trying to go for in the storytelling of this particular poem. So the first line came to me quite quickly, sort of a weeping willow by the lake of waters shallow. So it already starts there. And I think I've actually said most of the things I wanted to say about it now, because I've sort of covered all the my sort of bullet points, I think, when I'm looking at the poem now. Maybe I should say something about some other things now that I'm doing. Of course, as you can see, if you see this poem in front of you now, is that the rhythm is regular, but of course the lines are of different lengths, and of course the use of rhyme is a little bit different than usual, in that you have these words that sound good together, the half rhymes coming at different positions in the rhythm, which creates a slightly fuzzy, blurry, misty kind of feel to it, and maybe a kind of sort of drowsiness to it, which is part of the intention. But also, and this is especially apparent in verse, there's a little bit of it in verse number 2 actually. So one of the ways you can break up the rhythm of a poem, if you have one that's entirely regular, it can get a bit boring. So what is quite common to do in poetry is to break it up a little bit, sort of for instance. So you could do something like that. Another way to break it up is to, of course, to end in soft syllables. So a weeping willow by the lake of waters shallow. So it ends on a weak syllable and then it continues on a weak one of shallow, where we as children. So you get 2 syllables in a row that are unstressed. Another way to do it is to use the lines themselves to break up the rhythm a little bit, because you have, when you read a poem, it's almost like you have an implicit little pause at the end of a line. But of course, sometimes the sentences that make up the lines, they continue on the next line. So your path I follow again to rest here from the day in verse number 2, which breaks up the rhythm a little bit, because then it's like you have to make a slightly shorter pause between those two lines. And also, one bit that almost works really well to read together, which is what I decided to do when I was doing my poetry reading. So hear blackbirds sing, hear dim the days, through soft embracing leaves and dreams that billow. As in the evening breeze you sway, etc. So that's one thing you can do. And also, I gaze into the night and weep with happiness my tears upon this softest pillow. Again, the sentences flow across the lines in a different way than it does in the other one. So you have 3 verses now that all use... I'm not sure if what the exact term is in English now, because in Norway I know we call it enjambement, which is from the French. I just sometimes call it just follow-on lines, but I'm not sure what the correct term is in English. But the main point is, it doesn't matter what the term is for the actual poetic device, but it is a very useful poetic device to let lines, sentences flow across line breaks as a means of breaking up the rhythm of a poem. And if you do that while letting the rest of the poem actually follow a regular rhythm, I think it actually becomes a very strong kind of composition, a strong form that works better, I think, than actually trying to add or remove syllables from the pattern, at least in my opinion. Right, so I don't think I have many more things to add actually to this. I think I've actually said all the major points I wanted to say about it. Which is quite astounding. Normally I keep going off on digressions and tangents, and I sort of lose my thread a lot, but I think I've actually cut through it much more quickly than I expected. And of course I'm a bit flummoxed by that, which is why I'm flagging now and just wondering, what am I going to say? What am I going to say now? I don't know. So I think I'll just leave you with that. And if you have any questions, of course, about whether it's about my inspirations or my technique or my or poetic devices or anything like that, then just feel free to leave them in the comments. I don't bite. I answer any questions as long as they are sensible. So, yeah. Right, I hope you enjoyed this poem, by the way, and if you did, please consider buying my poetry collection that contains it, 3 words, and also my other ones, 1994 and Breaths of Time. Links in the description, as usual, and I'll see you in my next video. And by the way, I hope you're looking forward to the song version of this, because I made this with AI, and the thing about AI is that AI music making or song generating AIs is that they're quite... I'm still in 2 minds about these things, but I suppose it's okay as long as it's for a bit of fun and not for commercial use, really. But it's quite obvious that they have been trained on copyrighted material, and so the song, the Weeping Willow song version, does sound a little bit like it's been sung by Enya, which is exactly what I was hoping for. I didn't actually prompt for Enya, but it just so happens that that is the kind of voice and vocal that ended up on the song, and the version that I chose to keep when I was trying to make a music version of this. So I hope you enjoy that, and I'll see you in the next one. So thank you for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye bye.